Emotional vampires specialize in sucking your energy, joy, and peace. At their core, emotional vampires are empty and their self-centered behaviors take a heavy toll on emotional and mental well-being. Yet with solid awareness and healthy boundaries, you'll be able to spot emotional vampires and keep them from negatively impacting your life. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life questions. I think one of my new friends is an emotional vampire. Every time I'm around her, I feel drained and worse about myself. She always talks about what's going on for her. She dumps and she vents, and then she leaves without asking anything about me. Should I stop talking to her? Do you think she's really an emotional vampire? And with those questions as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
As we explore the listener's questions for today, let's first have a background about the world of emotional vampires. First, please note that I'll be discussing emotional vampires in very general terms and with a dose of humor. Yet it's a serious topic given the potentially negative impact on your mental and emotional well-being. There are variations on the emotional vampire theme, so please note I'm operating from my unique framework as a clinical psychologist. Also, take note that emotional vampires have different techniques and different degrees of how their characteristics present. So remember, there can be very slight degree of emotional vampire or an almost diabolical degree of an emotional vampire. Some are very subtle in their maneuvers and others can be overtly toxic. So we'll talk more about these characteristics and many more in just a moment. So first, what is a vampire? So tales of blood-drinking entities date back in history to ancient Persia. And many vampire myths also arose in the medieval period where there was a lot of darkness and fear. And then there was a surge of talk about vampires in the 17th and 18th centuries. And those led to our current depictions and fears of vampires. In more recent folklore, vampires are generally seen as creatures that use the actual blood of other people to remain alive. And without taking others' blood, they simply can't survive. So these creatures can also not bear daylight. They come out at night. And symbolically, when we look at this means that their darkness is hidden and it doesn't stand up to the scrutiny of the greater world. It doesn't stand up to the reflection of daylight. Now, vampires tend to work behind the scenes to do their damage because it's that type of work, it's that type of artificial way of being that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. People really can't tolerate it and don't want to tolerate it. And it's the same with real life emotional vampires. They do their emotionally draining work often in sort of dark, covert ways. So, what is an emotional vampire? An emotional vampire is similar in many ways to the vampires of folklore, but they're human and they can often act in very dark ways that make them seem almost inhuman because of the self-centered behavior. And like the vampires of legend, they do not concern themselves with the effects on other people. So whether it's vampires of legend or an emotional vampire, they're more concerned about themselves than about the effects on other people. The emotional vampire is at the core, a highly selfish individual who feeds on other people. their emotional energy, their physical energy, their mental energy, but largely emotional energy. Now, the vampires of folklore, they would steal the blood, but the emotional vampires steals the life essence of another human being to feel that inner void, which, by the way, is a pit. It is just, it can't be filled, which is why they keep draining and draining, because there's never enough from other people to satiate them. So, and again, no concern or empathy for the victim. Now, it's not that they're always particularly mean or hateful people, but as they interact with you, you can feel that you're getting lower and lower, more and more drained. You may feel as if they steal your joy, they suck your optimism, they rob you of your inner peace, or they simply drain your energy. So, what causes someone to be an emotional vampire? Although the term emotional vampire is not a clinical psychological term, or certainly not a diagnosis, the personality traits that we see in emotional vampires tend to be associated with mental health disorders such as narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. There are often substance abuse issues, but again, emotional vampire is not a diagnosis. We're just looking in a sort of humorous way at people who are very self centered. So, who does an emotional vampire target? Generally, emotional vampires will target anyone who will, be receptive to them, but they often prey on people who are either sensitives or highly sensitives, and people who have poor boundaries where they can invade the space and the other person will think, oh, what can I do? I don't have any power here. And they also tend to go after people who are people pleasing because they know that that person won't have strong boundaries and say, wait a minute, I need to take care of myself here. Now, the other thing about emotional vampires is that they get often a conscious or unconscious pleasure because they're really interacting in a way that makes them feel better about themselves. They're either offloading a lot or gaining attention, something that is giving them a sense of power. So if you look at an emotional vampire targeting another emotional vampire, it doesn't generally happen because it's too draining on both of them. They don't have enough to give to another emotional vampire and they don't want to give. And so it's more like getting blood from a rock and they can't get it from another emotional vampire. Another piece is that emotional vampires will target anyone who seems like an easy target. And this includes children, parents, siblings, or individuals in romantic settings, dating, marriage, other long term relationships. Emotional vampires don't know any limits, so they will go after people in the work realm, in parties, in social settings, anything. And of course, emotional vampires will often target people that they call friends. And that takes us to the question of today, where the writer is saying, she's asking two questions. Should I end this relationship, this friendship? And is this an emotional vampire? And although we don't have enough details to know if it's really an emotional vampire, the dumping, the venting, the all about me, self centered behavior, and then the leaving before the other person can share, those are all hallmark traits of emotional vampires. And then, so that answers one part of the question. And then the next part, we'll get to it in a little bit. Should she leave the relationship? Is that a wise idea? So we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's look a little bit more at emotional vampires. I believe that there are two types of emotional vampires: the unintentional, unaware type, and the intentional, goal directed type. So, in the unintentional type, their draining actions often result from low emotional awareness and a selfish core that they don't realize is there. There's not really an intention to do harm. This person, generally has not been told, or at least not soaked in, or received therapy for their self centered ways. So they're more bumbling around, just trying to get someone to listen, somebody to hear about their trauma or their sadness or their depression. And they truly don't realize the negative impact it has on other people. And they may not realize that it really keeps people, moving away from them. That differs from the intentional goal directed type. These are people that are much more active. active in causing harm to others. They may see that the person they're talking to has zoned out, or that they might even be making the person, cry or have a bad reaction, and they don't care. They are just going and going and going. And have often been told that they're self-centered or have narcissistic characteristics. They may have been advised to go to therapy, but they don't care. What they're after is getting that energy from other people, getting that fix, so to speak, that blood. And so this intentional goal directed type, they can be really harmful in overt ways, because even if you try and talk to them, they tend to return to their old sort of vampire-like ways. And their selfishness is so strong that they can be actively toxic, more than just draining. They can actually like really suck that blood out of you, suck your spirit, suck your joy, and always at your expense, of course, but they get is almost a charge out of it. You can see that they're getting something from that interaction. So that's the intentional goal directed type, very scary type. So we also can look at the passive and active parts of emotional vampires. They can have one key style or go between both styles depending upon what suits them. So we have the passive emotional vampires, and these are the ones that walk in to a room and you just feel that draining energy. It's more passive. It's like there's this dark cloud around them and it's kind of murky. And often their conversations are self-focused, sort of an absence of boundaries. They can be closed down, kind of gloomy, but the energy drain is palpable. And they tend to not add to whatever the situation is. And they really are just sucking. And again, they often don't realize it. And simply being in their presence, whether it's negative moods, emotional instability, and just that selfish, self-focused part can feel really toxic. Their lack of empathy, lack of support, lack of consideration, those are all draining. And then the non-vampire, the person who's receiving this energy often carries the emotional weight of the relationship and feels drained by that load. And this sounds like somewhat of what's happening for the listener's question, although some of it is active, but it also sounds like there's a sort of passive drain going on as well. And so the person who is the non-vampire tends to feel heavy, anxious, depressed, often confused, and after being in proximity to the vampire, because they're thinking, "What happened? Was that interchange me, or did some dark cloud just pass through the room? What happened?" Now, the active emotional vampire, and this definitely is more of the energy and the listener's question of today, these people tend to actively have toxic emotions and behaviors, very self centered. And although they can be charismatic and even kind at times, at the root, they're often just very egocentric, sometimes very angry, resentful, difficult personalities, but they're always self focused. And they can be sometimes very reactive, very rude, very sarcastic, especially if they're not getting their way. So that can make them, feel more draining. They can be highly taxing because they don't want to do their emotional work. And both styles tend to not do their emotional work. And so they actively push their negative energy onto other people. And that's the really important piece to know about the emotional vampire is their undone stuff inside and those empty holes and all of those emotions that are moving around and feelings and thoughts. They're just there. They're not working on them. They're not trying to heal them. They just might be vomiting onto other people, so to speak, and then just draining them. So it's this strange process where they can vent, trauma dump, or just dump, and then just drain the energy. It's a very toxic feeling. And if you've ever experienced an emotional vampire, you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, Now, what are some of the characteristics? Emotional vampires may seem ordinary and even appealing at first glance. That's why you can get blindsided by them. Because if they weren't, just like vampires in legend, they draw you in with something, and then all of a sudden they have their teeth in you. And so, beneath their superficial, often light, sometimes melancholy, but often there's sort of this light side, is this dark side, and they can flip to that dark world very quickly. And they will take advantage of people who they see as susceptible. And these can be people who a recovering people pleaser who's learning to have strong boundaries. It can be someone who has trauma of their own, or again, a highly sensitive person, or even a moderately sensitive person. Um, and so with the emotional vampire, they again have no desire to change or to do their inner work. And so unlike your regular person, who we all have light and shadow characteristics, we all have a little bit of each of what I'm about to list, because I'm going to give you a nice long list. Those are normal, but it's the degree and the chronic nature of them, and then the quick flip from the light to the dark, that is that hallmark of that emotional vampire. um, but and some of them will stay in that dark side, that more melancholy side, but others can do a flip. But again, what you're looking at is that with the emotional vampire, they don't engage in any form of self work or healing that would allow them to not suck other people's emotional energy, mental energy. So here are the red flags. They do switch between the light and dark characteristics that I'm going to list, and you want to be on the lookout for at least 5 of these characteristics, because it's quite a list, that are present more often than not. And note that these characteristics can ebb and flow over time. And depending upon the emotional vampire's goals, there may be more light at times, but you'll notice that the dark is generally there. And the light is the superficial part of that type of person, and the dark, again, is the more characterological trait. And that's what makes them so oppressive and toxic, is that that's where they live most of the time, in that dark world. So now I'll list each of these. I'll do the light, and then I'll do the corresponding dark. So for each one, you can keep tally on how many of these show up in the person that you believe is an emotional vampire. Light side is they're humorous. The dark side is that they're sarcastic and often critical. The light side is charismatic. The dark side is temperamental and easy to anger. The light side is witty. The dark side is rude. The light side is captivating. The dark side is deeply self-absorbed, deeply selfish. The light side might appear pleasing and flexible. The dark side will be bullying and selfish. The light side can show some awareness. The dark side will be calculating and not other or self-aware. The light side can have a nice story to tell. The dark side can be very deceptive and dishonest. The light side may appear confident. The dark side can be extremely superficial and internally empty. The light side can be independent. The dark side is insecure or overly hyper independent out of fear. The light side can seem casual. The dark side could be intensely jealous and again very selfish, where they may appear casual, but it's this selfishness underneath, this deep need to um, have everything their way. The light side may be willing, the dark side can be manipulative, the light side can be sweet, and then it can flip to the dark of viciousness. The light side can be, again, flexible, and the dark side can be very rigid. Light side can be easygoing, dark side demanding. Light side open and receptive, almost looking like they're open to you. And then the dark side is closed down and all about them. The light side can seem like there's healthy emotional EQ. They can show snippets of it. And then the dark side is very, very low emotional intelligence. The light side can seem playful. The dark side can have very little or no maternal or paternal or nurturing instinct, no care for others. That's where there's just no empathy. The light side can be giving, and the dark side can be miserly and give only for personal gain. So when you're looking at these and thinking about these, and we want to emphasize that piece, though I didn't call it out, the empathy is there. Oh, is not present. So there will be an overall lack of empathy because any empathy that's shown on the light side is countered by the true lack of empathy, that true deep self-centeredness. And that's the overarching piece here, the overarching lack of empathy and self-centeredness. So, what are the effects of emotional vampires? Well, the effects, if you're someone who's wondering if you have an emotional vampire in your life, notice that they can be interesting and even fun, but you may feel constantly on edge waiting for the next attack or draining interaction. Number two, you bear the emotional burden of the relationship. So you're really carrying that emotional load in the relationship. Number three, you feel that the relationship feels very one sided. Four, the emotional vampire is very willing to take from you in many ways, might be emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, but they have great difficulty giving. Reciprocity is not their forte. Next, you may feel physically and energetically drained after short or long interactions. That's the fifth one. Number six, gaslighting is so common. An emotional vampire can leave you questioning your reality. They are terrific at making you question yourself, doubt yourself. That's part of what they do. Number seven, you may become confused by the two faces, the light, the dark, that sort of shape shifting quality. Next, eight, you may try to make the relationship work, but they don't do their part. Number nine, there is little ability or desire to see you as a human being, to see what's going on in your world. Number 10, they have a low level of heartfelt interest in your life. Number 11, little or no emotional availability. 12, low EQ. 13, no empathy. 14, you find yourself consciously and or unconsciously avoiding them. So those are some of the effects that you might notice, some of the hallmark pieces. So what to do if you have an emotional vampire in your life? And this goes to that second piece of the listener's question. Should I break things off? Should I end this relationship? And what we want to look at is the emotional vampires in our lives. What, is it a family member? And we want to stay in contact? Is it a dear friend? And we want to stay in contact? Is it a new friend, as in this case, and we might want to step back from the situation altogether? Is it a coworker and we have to work with them, but we want to create, distance? Is it a romantic partner? And we're looking at, oh my goodness, I never heard of this concept before, and now it makes so much sense. So you get to choose based upon your situation and the actions that are going to work best for you. So first realize that likely you are a sensitive or either a high sensitive person, very, very sensitive, or a moderately sensitive person, and that's why the emotional vampire is going to you. Realize too that it might be that your boundaries are not very strong. So you might want to work on creating healthier boundaries. And also realize that if you're a people pleaser, that you might be the kind of person who, doesn't use their boundaries because you want to be the nice person. You want to care about other people. You want to show interest and you're afraid of causing harm. And none of these things are necessarily bad. Just realize that if it's causing you distress, that you want to work on the awareness and then creating those stronger boundaries so you can take good care of yourself, because your emotional health, your mental health is paramount. So what's another thing you can do after realizing your degree of sensitivity, just so you understand more about the dynamics? You might consult with a psychotherapist, a support group, a trusted mentor. You might start journaling about the interaction so you can create more awareness of how you can step back and how you can notice emotional vampires better in the future. You might again want to work on your boundaries, being able to say no, or, thank you for sharing, but I've got to go now, or thank you for sharing, let's change the topic, or, I appreciate that you have a lot to say. Let's make some space for me to share. All of these ways that you can use your boundaries in healthy ways. Next, do your self work. Really pay attention to anything that's getting triggered in you that that can help you become a stronger human being, set stronger boundaries so that you can take care of yourself. So if things are getting triggered, engage in good self-care, good self-reflection, so you can use that, whatever you're learning, to become a stronger, more empowered human being. If you are in a close relationship with the person and you want to stay in the relationship, you can ask them to do their work. Whether you suggest that they see a therapist, or suggest that you go to joint therapy, or you simply refer them to a good self-help book, you can let them know that you would appreciate that they work on their stuff. And don't be Velcro. And what I mean by that is, when we're sensitive, it's easy for us to take on other people's energy. So work at being more like wax paper. Work at stepping back and saying, wait, this is your stuff. This is your energy. This is your negativity. And I don't want that. Thank you. I think you need to go and work on that yourself. And being able, that way we become more like wax paper. And what I mean by wax paper is we become stronger in ourselves, more aware, so that we're not taking on other people's stuff. We're taking on ours, we're working with ours. And when somebody else is trying to drain us or be toxic with us, we're able to give it back. And this is different from compartmentalization, which is its own topic. Next, and this is a joke, cover your neck and eat garlic. Those are old tips for people who wanted to avoid vampires. In today's world, instead of covering our necks and eating garlics, it simply means limit your opportunity for contact with the emotional vampire. Just limit it. Just, create that nice distance, that barrier, so that when and if you choose to be around them, you're able to prepare in advance, and then you're able to do some good self-care afterward, which is often what we need after we've encountered an emotional vampire. And last, work to see the red flags that we've talked about today, and continue to create the emotional awareness that will help you notice different types of people that aren't healthy for you, including emotional vampires, and then just create more of that lovely emotional barrier that allows you to take good care of yourself and be your best self without feeling as though you're harming other people, because you don't want to ghost someone and harm them. But it's okay to say, I don't think this friendship is going anywhere. I'm in a place where I need, something else. So I, really want to move away from the relationship, and I wish you, every good thing in life, but this relationship is not good for me right now, or maybe ever. And finding a way to say something, again, this goes to the listener's question for today. Should she break it off? I can't tell anybody whether to keep a relationship or not keep a relationship. But what I can do is say, just notice if it's not good for you, if you always feel awful after leaving, your encounter with another person, it's okay to let that person know in the gentlest, kindest, most respectful way possible. I'm not going to be communicating anymore with you. I have, things that I need to tend to in my own life, and I wish you well. So something like that, that makes you feel as though you're coming from a place of authenticity without causing harm to the other person. Of course, we can't control how they're going to respond to that kind of break in a relationship. That's up to them. But as long as you're doing your part to be kind and respectful, then the balance is on them. But of course, always make sure you're safe. Always make sure that you are in a safe place emotionally and physically when you are asking someone not to communicate with you anymore, if that is the route you go with an emotional vampire. So thank you so much for exploring this very interesting topic with me. I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website, I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.